Welcome to Global Connections on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about decoding Syria and what can the world learn from what is going on? What lessons will they all be teaching us? Our guest for the show is Roopmati Khandekar, geopolitical analyst. Welcome to the show, Roopmati.
Aloha, Jay. Thank you for having me on your show. It's always a great pleasure.
Well, we really timed a great discussion here. We're right in the middle of things. And we really have to analyze beyond, just connecting the dots. We want to also take a look at what the players are, what the factors, the threads are, how they play together, how they engage together, and of course, what will happen in the future. Let me ask you to start. How did Syria get to be such a brutal dictatorship? What happened to allow it to become a pariah state, a state with no civil liberties, a state with horrible torture and violation of human rights? How did that happen?
Jay, so on 27 November, we see that the situation in Syria has spiraled out of control. And within a matter of 11 days, Jay, the 50-year-old rule of the Assad family in Syria ends. So now this is huge news because this is like a earthquake, a huge earthquake on the Richter scale. Because, Jay, this was a massive offensive by a coalition of rebel forces against the government. So, Jay, the Syrian government has been led by Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian Ba'athist Party. So, Jay, Assad has always been helped by Iran and Russia in his political. They are his political backups, like you said, and he has had a wide mix of socialism and Arab nationalist ideas in his rule regime. So, Jay, but in his practice, actual practice, this was his ideology. But in actual practice, his rule was by authoritarianism. He had brutal persecution of opponents. There was nepotism and widespread dissent in the population. Jay, you have this news flashing everywhere that the Syrian jails were a torture chamber. 60,000 people were cramped into it. You spoke against the government, you would be pushed into these jails. So they were put open by these rebels in this uprising, Jay.
He was not only filling the jails with anybody who spoke against him, not only using torture and murder and horrible violations of human rights, but he was also, bombing them with chemical weapons. He was killing hundreds of thousands of his countrymen. It was really extraordinary. And let me stop for a moment and ask you, could this happen somewhere else? What kind of a lesson is it that this could exist on the planet and nobody stopped him? And in fact, he was encouraged by Russia and Iran over the years. This is really chilling that he could exist as a dictator who was doing these things to his own people. It is kind of worrisome to know that this could exist in our world, isn't it?
Yeah, Jay, interconnectivity and information everywhere, but these kind of things stay hidden from the general public. Why is it not in the news every day? It's a big question that you put out because, see, authoritarian regimes thrive on oppressing the population, and he was doing exactly that. So why hasn't this come out in the open for decades? It's a 50-year-old rule by the Assad family, and it's not been smooth. Additionally, Jay, he is from the Alawite religious minority in Syria. So you have a religious minority trying to dominate the majority population of Syria. So there creates another religious tension. So all these things, Jay, and the only thing you can bring order by is by force. And that's exactly what Assad was doing. He was being helped blatantly by Russia and Iran. And through the program, we'll see what Iran and Russia had through Syria that they had valued this country so much. Jay?
Well, let me ask you a hard question. The U.S. could see this. We do have intelligence agencies, or we will have had them. I'm not sure what's going to happen after January 20th. That our intelligence agencies must have known what he was doing. The media knew a lot about what he was doing. What was the U.S. position? What action did the U.S. take over all these years while he was creating this horrible totalitarian government?
Jay, the waiting game, the US was playing the waiting game, and if we now sort out and detail the factions which are involved in this rebellion, we get to know exactly which parties were there and why they were waiting. So we'll get down to that, and so let's start with the strongest and leading organization of this rebellion, which was the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that is the HTS for short. So this was formed after in 2017. That is the beginning of the Syrian civil war that it happens, and it has been coagulated from organizations like Al Nusra, that is an Al Qaeda affiliate, and Abu Muhammad Al Jolani, who is the face of this rebellion and flashed across newspapers. He is affiliated with both ISIS and Al Qaeda. So he is very, very dangerous in that sense. So that is one group, the HTS. The second is the Syrian National Army. Now, this is a collection of various militant organizations also formed in 2017. And who is the main supporter of this? Turkey. So they are the main supporter and funder of funds and equipment for the Syrian National Army. This is a name, not the actual army. So they were fighting for Erdogan against Assad and for against the Kurdish groups in the north and northeast of Syria. So Jay, Turkey does not want these separatist groups to exist because they raise the tensions in the Kurdish areas of Turkey itself. So they want to have a Turkish state. Kurdish in Turkey, Kurdish in Syria, Kurdish in Iran, Kurdish in Iraq. They want to form a separate nation known as Kurdistan. So that's why Assad wanted to keep these people at bay and started promoting the Syrian National Army. Then HTS used to negotiate with the Kurdish forces, which the Syrian National Army was fighting. It's a little bit complicated. So as soon as we sort it out, you will get to know what it is. Then you have the Syrian Democratic Forces. That's the SDF. And now this was supported by the US, and particularly because of its fight against ISIS. It was a very dangerous phase that we had with ISIS, and we needed these people to be there. They know the ground tactics, so that's what. And the SDF had a quasi alliance with Assad, and some even had support from Russia as well as the US. So they were like playing the two polar game. And the SDF was also fighting against Turkey and the Syrian government. So, and one more mention we can make is about the new Syrian army, Jay. This is a small US-backed group which used to control the desert area of the border crossing with Iraq. And there's an American base over there. So it was necessary to have this group over there. So all these small factions used to have agreements and disagreements with Assad over time. So Assad's position with these groups kept on changing. And that's where these tensions keep on moving. And the civil war remains dynamic all through these years.
The first question comes to mind, and I was thinking about this while I was watching the news. Can the primary group of rebels, the ones who took the cities, starting Aleppo and Homs, and then, of course, Damascus, yes, they have connections with Al Qaeda and ISIS, but can they recover from that? Can they change? Can they find a way, to be democratic and enlightened? Can they find a way to care about the people they control? Or is the background going to be more like these terror groups? U.S. classifies these rebels as terrorists, but maybe they can change. Is there any indication that they could?
Doubtful, Jay, because the HTS, which is the main rebel group, that came up, gained popularity on the basis of promising to protect the minorities, and they have always broken their promise, as usual, as happens in terror groups. They promise you the heavens, but they don't give you anything on the earth. So immediately, as soon as the government has fallen, they are parading the roads of Syria with ISIS flags. So that's a big, not the Syrian flag, not any democratic flag or any minority flag. It's the ISIS flag. So fanatism has entered Syrian grounds very strongly, Jay, with this rebellion.
What about all these groups you mentioned? I didn't realize there was so many of them. Is it possible that they could, come together, that they could collaborate? They could get on the same page about what to do now that they've taken over, now that HTS has taken over Damascus? Or are they going to be fighting separate wars, fighting with each other?
Jay, now for the time being, they have come together and they are promising to form government. And you have the new interim prime minister as Muhammad al-Bashir, and he's going to keep this transitional government until March the 1st. So they're promising that, but they're not experienced, or they're not inclined towards a democratic setup in the sense that we see it, Jay. It won't be like that. See, even the Taliban has set up government, but it's a different kind of government. They rule by gun and sword. They rule by the law that kills you if you commit a crime. There is no appeal. There is no justice. There is nothing. There is suppression of women rights. There's so many other aspects to all this, Jay. It's going to change.
We know in Iran that we have a theocracy. I mean, they're often called a theocracy. And we know in Afghanistan, it's a theocracy. Are the directions pointing here to a theocracy in Syria, or will this be just a terror state?
Jay, worse than a theocracy, because at least Iran is united by a religion and by oppression, an oppressing regime. They control the borders and they keep the country united. Here in Syria, what has happened? These rebel groups they have literally made Syria a termite infested country. There are bits and pockets now, and each one will break away to govern themselves. And as we see in what are the implications with each country, we'll see how the Golan Heights will get affected, how the north and northwestern corners will get affected, how Turkey will take over some part of this, how Iraq will be trying to gobble up area. So it's going to be not the Syrian borders that we imagined before. It's going to be torn apart. And Assad himself was from a minority, religious minority. So religion is not going to play as much as a major part as these rebel forces who have now fought the Syrian government to take control. But now who will control maximum power? They'll have infighting. And that infighting, Jay, they will lose eons of time. They're not going to be able to establish.
Well, one of the problems that I have been thinking about is that there's 70 years without a representative government, 70 years without an enlightened government, and a brutal dictatorship. And over 70 years, you forget. You have a national amnesia about what it might have been like before. And so if you need to create democratic elections, democratic government, institutions of all kinds that you need to run a country, there's no recollection of how to do that. And certainly with HTS they're not skilled in that at all. So you have a real problem in creating a government of any kind going forward. And I guess the trouble I see is this is easily going to devolve into chaos. Don't you think that's possible? Without a government, without anybody to provide governmental services, without anybody to make a quality of life of any kind for the people there, in the absence of the dictatorship, it will be pandemonium. Do you agree?
Yes, Jay, yes. Because the rebel coalition came with this support of Turkey and the presence of Ukrainian experts in night warfare, trained rebels, and the Aleppo, Hama, Homs, Damascus, they fell like dominoes, Jay. And the southern rebel groups brought themselves together in a coalition known as the Southern Operations Room, and they took over Damascus and Homs. So these kind of bits and pieces that are happening north south, and the ease with which the government was fleeing the situation was an indication of how weak their grassroots hold was, Jay.
Israel's attacks against Hezbollah was the factor that led to this, because Hezbollah was supporting Assad. Hezbollah was creating this conduit between Iran and Hezbollah's action in Lebanon. Is that true? Do you agree with that? Does the fall of Hezbollah play a role in what happened here?
Hezbollah's cadre, Jay, from top to down, has been destroyed by Israel because of the terror attack that happened on Israel on October 7th. That um, disintegration of Hezbollah support was, like you rightly said, a big factor in the Syrian demise, Jay, because these people used to be like bodyguards for Assad's regime. They used that fear of the Hezbollah coming in if you go against the Assad regime was always looming on them. So Hezbollah was like a safety net for Assad, and with Hezbollah gone, the people knew that they can go and go against the Assad regime. See, he doesn't have a popular ground support. He's from the minority religious community.
You know what I get over a period of time, the Assad family relied on foreign powers, external forces to maintain power, whether it was Hezbollah, Iran, Russia, Turkey, and others probably in the region. And because it relied on those powers had influence. And so you had all these power groups trying to affect what Assad was doing. And if you rely on that sort of thing, then one day it can go away, like what happened here. And the problem I see is that now there's a vacuum, and the same kind of thing could happen again. You have competing powers trying to get a handle on the new Syria. Russia, Iran, I don't know about Jordan, maybe to some extent Jordan. Israel, it has its interests. Lebanon and Hezbollah have its interests. Turkey. And so, it's kind of like the same situation where the vacuum, call it a power vacuum in Syria, exists. And all these guys from outside Syria, want to come in and be influential. That didn't work the first time. In fact, it was a royal disaster the first time. Is that going to happen again? And if so, what's the result?
CJ, this war had this rebellion had its implications on the countries, and so let's start with Turkey for this. Then we can just go step by step and understand what exactly happened. For Turkey, the biggest two key objectives that they had, first was to oust Assad. They achieved it, and second was to significantly reduce the Kurdish rebellion in the north of Syria, which gives rise to separatist sentiments in Turkish area. And then the United States, Assad gone, Russian and Iran influence reduced. For them, it was that. Then you have Israel, which is now for Israel, Jay, it's a very awkward situation because it's a two-sided sword that they are dealing with. First, Assad gone as an ally of Iran. Second, Syria is going to be led by Islamic jihadist forces, which have one target, and that is Israel. So for that, they have to be very, very vigilant on this front, and that is the exact reason that you have Israel taking the UN buffer zone and conducting air raids in South Syria in Damascus immediately before the government equipment falls in the hands of the Syrian rebels. So you have the Golan Heights being, which was since 1967 Syrian territory. Now Israel has taken, so that they don't come inside Israel and cause another front, opening of another front. Because first thing they shout out is head towards Jerusalem. So for Russia, Jay, Syria was the main gateway to Middle East for Russia. And they had two important military centers in Syria. So, and for Iran, Jay, Syria is an important link to Hezbollah, like you mentioned. And secondly, Iran has been swift to enter into diplomatic negotiations with these rebel forces, including the HTS, to trade for security of the Shiite minority in Syria and protection of the Shiite religious centers in return for the Iranian recognition for the new Syrian government. So they are very selfish in this. They have forgotten Assad in this, and they've moved on with their own agenda.
I think geographically, it's important to notice that um, the Syria is essentially the center of the Middle East. I mean, the geographical center, isn't it? It's right there in the middle of everything. And I can see that Russia would want to have a position there because from Syria, geographically, you can do anything you want. Russia has a big military facility in Syria, and that would motivate Putin to try to make peace with, make a relationship, if you will, with whoever is going to be in charge. He wants to hold on to his military assets. Am I right?
Yeah, Putin wants to hold on to the military hold that he has in Syria, Jay, because it's his gateway to the Middle Eastern politics. And without Syria, Putin has nothing to do with the Middle Eastern conflict. Whatever he wants to do, whatever he wants to poke Israel with, or give a twerk to the Israel-Hamas conflict, he does via Hezbollah or the promotion of Iranian Russian ties. These are the kind of things that he indulges in. But with now Syria gone, he has granted asylum to Assad immediately. But for how long, until when, and what will be the implications of this also? Because he himself is on the technically on the run. He's a war criminal for the world. So what is happening is there's total chaos on the political and diplomatic front. And like you said, Jay, in your talk, that eventually they might just let this go and leave it to fall on them on their fate, because here you have these um, Islamic jihadist groups which are part of ISIS and Al Qaeda, which are going to take over. Can they rule the government? It's highly unlikely, Jay.
You talk about Assad sitting in Moscow, thanks to Putin, another war criminal. But clearly, Assad is a war criminal. He's a criminal. He's a violator of human rights. He's awful. And now that the jails have been emptied and people can see what he was doing to their countrymen, it's the evidence is there about Assad. So it seems to me that that if the UN had any kind of rationality here, they would likewise issue an arrest warrant from, just the same way as they issued for Putin against Assad. Do you think that will happen? Will he be taken to task for what we have found, what they have found he was doing in Syria?
See, Jay, you mentioned an international organization which is lying defunct, because right now we have UN peacekeepers working all over the globe. They should have converged into Syria and help protect regimes, government. We are not talking of Assad's legitimacy, but still to protect a rebellion like this. Now, this rebellion was forging through the people, so it did not harm the people. God forbid if it was something which would have come oppressing the people or killing the people, still nobody would have done anything about it. Our world has come to a watch point, Jay. People just watch and they just forget what is happening. So even if you have a violent rebellion, somebody taking over a government, somebody's government falling, nobody is interfering or nobody's protecting.
If you had to blame somebody for allowing Assad to be taken this way, it would be Putin, because he was deploying his troops, his war effort against Ukraine, and in fact, they've been making advances in the Donbass right now, and so he's been devoting himself to the war against the invasion of Ukraine, and he did not have the resources to continue to help Assad defend himself from the rebellion. So I find that very interesting. If you had to look at one guy who could have stopped this, if you look at one guy that could have, helped Assad retain his power, it would have been Putin, but he didn't do it. He faded. And that is very interesting in terms of Putin's inability to have the resources and take the action he's been taking all this time. He was helping Assad. He was bombing various cities in Syria and providing all kinds of military resources to Assad, but he stopped doing that. So it's just the way of observing. It seems to me Putin let him go. He abandoned him. Anyway, there seems to be a difference of opinion between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Joe Biden immediately, within hours, he began, using American military resources to bomb parts of Syria and maybe ammunition or the army. I'm not sure what. In the same moment, Donald Trump, who really is not in power yet and shouldn't be saying anything, he said, well, we should stand back. We should not do anything. And we, meaning the whole world, should stand back. Those are two very different positions. So I wonder, can you compare and contrast those positions and the motivations of Joe Biden and Donald Trump?
They're two contrasting situations because Biden, while going out, he's trying to do something concrete. But right now, the situation is such that the government has fled. So even if you bomb for the rebels, they're not going to stop because there's no government left to handle the situation. And Donald Trump is completely what can we call it, loco in his outlook, because just watching the main hegemon, like we always say, hegemon of the international system, watching is not a good sign at all. There has to be something done. There has to be something coming up. You can't take a static position in this game of war, because you're giving an entire country in the hands of jihadis or extremists. So Israel is very right when they first get down to business immediately within hours, and they bomb Damascus government military holdings, so that this equipment, these resources do not fall in the hands of the jihadis. So that's the exact line of action that even the US should take, to not allow that these people take control of these weapons, because it's going to be used in a very different way. We saw Al Qaeda was such an organization which came from Tora Bora and came to the World Trade Center. So if they have resources, they can do anything. So first we have to do is nip their resources.
Yeah. Well, okay. We know what happened here in the first days after the rebels were successful in taking Damascus. But now the work really begins, and it's not only the work of the various groups who really should try to collaborate and reach a democratic government, elections, if you will, and an enlightened way of dealing with the public who has been so badly treated in Syria. But also the work has to be done by these other nations, and especially the United States, especially Joe Biden in the next few weeks, and Donald Trump when he takes power January 20th. So I want to make you Secretary of State. Roopmati, I really enjoy making you Secretary of State. So it's not just right now. It's not just today, tomorrow. It's over the time between now and the transition and after the transition. As Secretary of State, what would you do to protect American interests and to protect the free world, the morality, the liberal order? What would you do?
CJ, first, we have American bases on the lines of next to the borders near Iraq, Syria, all these places. First and foremost is to protect these places, these centers, because charity begins at home first. If you just don't protect your own interests, can't do anything else about the other people. So the military bases. Secondly, we know that the target of these Islamist jihadists is just the beacons of democracy, that is America and Israel. So if they recuperate or they rejuvenate or they get power or any sort of thing, they will come for America and they'll come for Israel. There's a proverb saying that when a blind man gets eyes, the first thing that he throws away is the stick which helped him walk around. So these people are going to do the same thing. They're going to just come for America, even if you help them, if you don't help them. So it's better not to help them in any regard, to be powerful, leave them to their own fate till the point that we have an opposition party which takes over this country, rather than you have these rebel groups, it'll be more organized. It'll be a sort of finding out a political successor for Assad, rather than finding a rebel group to replace Assad. That will be the right way to go about it, because you cannot expect loyalty from these Islamic jihadis rebel groups. That's the main crux of the solution, Jay.
So what do we do? Are you advocating affirmative action of some kind? But what is that action? Should we go in there and be active and show them, for example, this occurs to me. Should we show them, here's how you build or rebuild a government, the institutions you need to manage the country? Should we show them how to have a legislature and a court system? How to have a chief executive? Should we try to give them, our own image of a three branch democracy? Do we send advisors and consultants? Do we talk to them? Do we try to be the good guy in everything they need to do? Or is the answer somewhere between isolationism, Trump's isolationism, and active affirmative action? Where do you go as the Secretary of State?
Trump's isolationist policy is worse than worse situation, because ultimately they are going to come for America, Jay. The moment they get activated, they are going to come for America. So isolationist policy doesn't work. You have to be proactive in this and try to find a political opponent who will take care of this. You'll have now, for the moment, Mohammed al-Bashir is going to be the interim prime minister. To groom him, to find supporters for him, to find a moderate face in this Syrian government, to give him the logistical support, rather than trying to teach. We can't teach democracy to a theocratic setup of society, Jay, because there's a dearth of understanding. They have this close boundaries which they will not cross. They will rather make their own limitations, and so we cannot have this three-tier system of governance over there. They have to have their type of government, and to find a liberal face, or they don't have a charismatic face right now. They have Mohammad Jolani, who is an Al Qaeda and ISIS cadet. You have Kurdish forces trying to have their autonomous region. You have all these places, but luckily they have been able to find this person, the Mohammed Bashir, who's going to be the interim prime minister. Can you groom him? Is the main question, Jay. And
Yeah, I certainly agree. You got to have a leader that people can look to, and he certainly has emerged. But at the same time, if we are going to be the good guys and go in there and try to help them, give them money, for example, to rebuild. Homs and Aleppo have been virtually destroyed, and other cities over the past few decades. So it reminds me of the Monroe Doctrine in the 1820s, where the U.S. said to the world, Latin America is ours, and we don't want you coming in here and influencing what goes on in Latin America. We'll take care of it. Stay off, stay away. Now, as part of your role as Secretary of State, wouldn't you want to do that? Wouldn't you want to either, tell Russia or negotiate with Russia and Iran and Jordan and Israel and Lebanon, what's left of it, and Turkey? Why don't you guys just stay out of Syria? Because the more parties, the more players that are contending for power and influence in the new Syria, the riskier it is. So just stay away. Would that be part of your position as Secretary of State?
Jay, right now the situation in Syria is so complicated because these factions are different, with different aims and objectives, supported by different countries in all four directions, and so you can't have unity amongst this. Can we bring Russia and US-backed rebel forces, or Russia and US to come together and say that we are backing these? Let's come together. It can't. It's not possible. So, like the Cold War theaters that were there. This is also a result of the conflict which happened in Ukraine, Russia, and Israel-Hamas, because Hezbollah fell, Syrian government fell without the support of this Hezbollah bodyguards. And so to have the complexity of the countries and the different rebel groups and the background of these groups, these three factors make this resolution so complicated that the main idea is to just, and if you pump in money and resources to these rebel groups, I'm sure they fall into the wrong hands and they reach the shores of America within a matter of few little time. So that's why we cannot pump in money there. So the situation for this is to take a proactive role in just keeping these uh, rebel groups confined to their zone and not let it spill over to American interests, not even harm an American camp or base in Iraq or anywhere else. That's the main priority right now, to see how these rebel forces act. Because what happened in Taliban after the US forces came out? We thought they would, they had the same proceedings which happened. They stormed the palace. They came onto the streets. They did everything. Now it's relatively quiet over there. They're ruling within themselves with their kind of government which they like. The people have given into their style of ruling. So we let that happen with Syria, and while protecting American and Israeli interests, Putin has done his part in protecting his. He's busy with his own Ukraine war. So that's the way to deal with Syria right now, Jay.
Well, they say, and it seems clear that this ends the axis of resistance, which has been organized, maintained, and provoked and supported by Iran. And Iran takes a huge hit on this change. We know that what happens in Syria will have a profound effect on the Middle East in general, on every country in the Middle East, every country, Sunni and Shiite, all the same. And the Middle East will change, and I want to ask you about that. But one thing it seems clear is that Iran's influence and power to support its proxies, including Hezbollah, for that matter, Hamas, and in Yemen, the Houthis in Yemen, it's undermined seriously. It may be over. So if the axis of resistance is over, how does that affect things? What kind of sea changes are we going to see in the Middle East? Are they good because the axis of resistance is over, or are they bad because it's chaos?
The axis of resistance, Jay, has weakened to such an extent that it's negligible. Its effect will be negligible. And Jay, the chaotic situation in the Middle East will continue for such a long time because they have these factions which don't listen, and they unite only in the name of a common enemy, that is Israel. So for them, the uniting force will always remain. You take the word Israel and they unite. You take the word Islamic Brethren and they unite. So Middle East politics always shows affiliations to its religious ideology over and above everything else, Jay. And that causes this disorder.
Israel is kind of symbol of the West. And
Mm.
I think most people, most of the citizens of these various countries don't like the West in general. They don't particularly like Western Europe. They don't like the U.S. And they don't like Israel, and clouded in all this anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. But it's a symbol of the West. This is clash of civilizations. What strikes me is that if you go back in history and you look at the Middle East and all the countries we've been talking about in the Middle East, all including Syria, you find that these countries have not made any progress, either politically or economically. Over the past, 100 and some odd years, it's really been backward. And,
Mm,
you like to think that the people who ultimately rise to a credible, continuing uh, governmental system in Syria will build Syria the way Syria has not been built, and will
mm,
make Syria a kind of model, if you will, because it starts from ground up, of good government, of caring, of enlightenment, of better economy, better quality of life. But it strikes me that if you look at the history of all those countries, you're not going to find that. You're going to find that the precedent is really the other way. And the sad observation of it is that this does not necessarily signal any improvement in the Middle East and in the Islamic roots of the Middle East. It could be terrible, uh, as you say, and it could be, static. Maybe. I'm not sure anything is static these days. But in any event, it's not going to be a renaissance of the Middle East. Your thoughts on that?
you're so right on this, Jay. It is the right point that you bring about because they have a closed mentality, Jay. It's in the ideology that is very confined and they want it to be limited. Now, when you have migration of the same Islamic population in the Middle East to a Western setup, they will adjust with it. They will thrive in it, but they will want their own law. Like you have the Sharia cells which are being set up in the UK. Blatantly, they want the Sharia law to be implemented all across the UK with Muslim majority areas. So they want their style of living in an affluent Western society instead of trying to assimilate in the country that you come in, or trying to assimilate into the ethos or ethics of ruling or governance that you bring in. They don't want that. And when they reject it from their mindset, Jay, that is when you cannot impose democracy in this. Uh, like when you speak to them about the executive, legislature, and judiciary, they don't accept it. For them, the legislature, executive, judiciary is only in the religious book. So there is a lot of confinement in their acceptance of this openness, Jay. And that is why they cannot adjust to anything, and that's why they're so rigid, and that's why why ISIS and Al Qaeda thrived in these societies, and Bin Laden found refuge in Pakistan for years and years because they protected him rather than feeling sympathetic to American interests of finding the uh, mastermind of 9/11. They sided with Osama. He was living in a compound of next to the Pakistan army. So what is this affiliation to the brethren is far above anything other than that, Jay. So that's where we fall short. We feel maybe they will progress, maybe they will come together, maybe they will come together only in the name of protecting their own religion or harming their enemy.
Well, you describe a Syria which may be carved up into little fiefdoms for all these
Yes.
various contending groups, which is troubling because that doesn't lead to national improvement or enlightenment. And I'm troubled about that. I'm also troubled about an article I saw which tells us that Iran's options have been limited now. Iran can either negotiate a kind of peace, which it hasn't done. It's a modern industrial country, and it has the ability to manufacture weapons and all that. But the two options that this one commentator mentioned in connection with Iran is one, negotiate some kind of peace, a new connection between Iran and the rest of the Middle East and the West, and the other is to go down the nuclear bomb road and retain or improve its power position by completing the job of making nuclear bombs. So we have this fragmented possibility, likelihood, if you will, in Syria. We have all these people outside, countries outside, vying to advance their own national geopolitical interests. And we have Iran, which is not too far away from having bombs. And so the question I put to you is this going to devolve into a war? Because wars are viral. Look at all the major wars. They started small, and before you know it, you know, they were major world wars. Is this going to devolve into a war in the Middle East? It's been a hotbed for so many years. It's been violent and contentious, filled with hatred and the like for so many years. Is this gonna is this gonna burn? Is this the tinderbox that we might expect?
There is a prediction by a lady who's blind. You remember that one who makes predictions? She said the Syrian downfall would cause the coming up of the World War III. So possibility of a World War III. So that was her prediction. And but Jay, Iran and Russia, who Baba Vanga, her name is. Russia and Iran, who have been in Syria, entangled in Syrian politics, they could not sustain themselves in this rebellion uprising because they don't know the uncertainty that these people brought. Even Iran say that you just protect our Shiite minority and our shrines, and we will give recognition to the government. Nothing was on the cards for a government to be formed, but immediately they came up with just limiting their demands on the Syrian card. So even Russia pulled out, gave asylum to Assad, and stood out of this. So both these countries who have been hand in gloves with Syria, who know the government in and out, know that this is going to be a chaotic situation and maybe for a very, very long time, Jay. Because now who gets what is the question, Jay. All the rebels had been found. These are small rebellions, rebel groups, and they are fighting for limited causes. Never wanted to fight for the Syrian government. They wanted a Kurdish autonomous area. They wanted arms. They wanted money, and suddenly they get in their hands a government, a country. What do they do with it? They're not trained for this kind of political maneuvering, Jay.
No, nobody is prepared. Nobody is
Not.
ready. Nobody has a viable and positive plan. So here we are with another country of some substantial size, which is in a state of chaos. Thank you very much, Roopmati. We're out of time. We'll have to leave it there, but we will follow it. It's a very timely discussion. I'm so glad we talked about it today. Thank you so much to our guest, Roopmati Khandekar, geopolitical analyst. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Thanks to our viewers for watching. Aloha.
Aloha, Jay. Thank you for having me. Thank you so very much.